Woolworths, combination of clothes and food and household goods as well. I think we've all been into their stores. Founded in Cape Town in the 1930s by Max Sonnenberg, pioneered and styled on some of the other corporate Marks and Spencer's type company, not to be confused with some of the Woolworths that you can encounter in other countries. This one is unique. Has an organic food retailing offering here in South Africa. It's got significant interests in clothing, in particular in Australia. We'll talk about those in a moment. Market cap of 62 billion rand, price to earnings ratio 21.4, dividend yield of 2.7. Chris, similar story here, didn't fall as much at the beginning of the year. It's had some quite ups and downs this year, but appears to be trading at or around 75 rand, pretty close to its all-time high. I think it was perhaps at 80 before. Overall, though, this one certainly seems to be gaining market share. Ian Moyer, the CEO, everybody loves him as well. Thoughts on this?
It's a very special company, Paul, and it's a very unique company. If you go back to the 1970s and 80s, this was very much the darling of the sector. Fell out of love with some investors when it had that wool true thing, when it
combined itself with Truworths.
But for many years, they'd never quite got their clothing right. The clothing was always very good and solid and dependable, but it was never really that interesting, particularly to the younger generation. That's all changed now. So, you know, we've got a company that's kind of reinvented itself in recent years, first with Simon Sussman and then more recently with Ian Moyer. And so now you're looking at a company that's always had the food side incredibly right. Yep. The clothing side has come right. And of course, the thing that's sitting there waiting in the wings for a turnaround in the economy, when we get more of an appetite for credit coming through, is the financial services side. Beautifully constructed, very clean looking balance sheet there. So that, I think, will add another element to this whole thing, a very positive one in years to come.
So as you say, firing on all cylinders. What about the Australia thing? Because they got quite big there, and most recently with that Witchery acquisition. Yeah. I mean, I was always a bit skeptical about that because, you know, by now the Australians presumably have got as many clothes as they need. But they seem to be doing well down there too.
In the late 1990s, when they bought this thing, a lot of skepticism. I was a sell-side analyst in those days, and the person who covered it from the company in those days said, no, they've made a big mistake. It took them the best part of a decade to get this one right, because while Country Road was good quality, it was aiming at a kind of 30-plus market, and they didn't quite change their offering. Now, Moyer comes in, and he changed it completely. He did a fantastic job with Country Road.
He was the CEO down
the CEO,
there
that's right, in Country Road in Australia. So again, he's really cut his teeth in a jurisdiction like Australia, which has been the graveyard for so many South African retailers. They spent a lot of time, money and effort. They got it right. Trenery, the Witchery, as you mentioned. So now they've got a really big chunky piece of first world, developed world retailing that is going very, very nicely indeed. And of course, even in South Africa, some of the Woolies stores here, you see those offerings there. They're not cheap, but in incredibly high quality, and they're in big demand.
Because you're right, that used to not be particularly strong point for them, and everybody criticized them for not having that mixed right and preferring the clothes, preferring the food, myself included. But on the food, I mean, that's just great, because by far, of all the retailers and the grocery stores specifically, they stand out as having the best food offering. So if you can afford it, you know that their cold chain is preserved, you know that the quality of the stuff that they've got, their various sources, and really they stand head and shoulders above anyone else in the retail space with regard to food. No, the margins, I think, are much better than everyone else's.
Funnily enough, the margins aren't that much better. I mean, they're about 6-7% as against ShopRite, about 5.5%, getting on to 6%. So they're a lot lower than you might think, but they're 90% private label. Only about 10%, maybe a bit less than that, comes in the form of national brands, proprietary brands. So they've done an exceptional job on that. And one of the interesting side effects of that is that because South Africa is a relatively small market as far as the food manufacturers are concerned, many of them don't want to make private label. And Woolies, because it's predominantly private label, have actually managed to corner the market virtually in private label.
And they have very strong relationships then with their private label supplier, and there's a big thing about quality and the feedback is good and so on and so forth.
Yes.
And as far as market share is concerned, they appear to have been growing and gaining market share because there's a little bit of a drift, people are able to afford it in the good times. One final question, that financial services thing you mentioned, remind me who their partners are and what their stake there is, because didn't they sell half the book to ABSA?
It's a bank called ABSA, yes, that's the one, yes. And they've done a great job there. No, it's worked out exceptionally.
And is it a 50-50 type of venture? Is that how it works, or have they sold the book in its entirety?
They've sold the book to ABSA, it's a joint venture, but it works very, very well.
So ABSA manages all the credit risk and all the rest of it, but Woolies has the Woolies card and all the incentive programs and all the rest of it, and they presumably get a whacking fee back for that in terms of the introductory business.
Yes.
Excellent.